Hi, welcome back to my deconstruction series of monistic idealisms, video interviewing Bernardo Kastrup. And I'll just jump right back into the frying pan from the fire at 006 and more on illusionism. So let's see what's in store.
I mean, that's kind of true. Well, when I found the assumptions of limitivism and illusionism over the last few weeks, first they start with, we understand what matter is, but that's a huge, long...
We don't.
Yeah, the intrinsic nature argument. We'll get to that actually in a second. It's about Ontic and epistemic structural realism. But the other three things are, the brain is lying to us. So, but if you say your brain's lying to you, you fall into that same trip that you could be in the Matrix, the flying spaghetti monster, that kind of stuff. You can't refute it. But, and then, so then the third one is, consciousness is a deep illusion we come to intuitively believe, and as it is a shortcut to understanding a lot of information in a quick amount of time. But in a sense, it's kind of interesting because Donald Hoffman talks about that, but as an idealist. Not that the brain's lying to you, but it's like the dashboard. Actually, you talk about that too. So in a sense, you could have an illusion, but the ontology is idealist. But that one was interesting. And then
That is a bit of a problem, that statement. What is it, the mind or the brain? The mind is lying to you. Well, that would entail that it actually have directly access to an external world. It would have to be the external world. And even then, what would it make sense to say, I am the external world, so I know what I am, right? And if it's not the external world, it can't lie because it doesn't know what it is. It's again this, and what is mind? I mean, look at my ontology. I don't need mind there. I'm describing all the phenomena. There is no mind that is a phenomena in the best of my estimation. These are artificial labels, just like France or mammal, right? These are artificial categories. And apparently mind is a catch-all term for a spatial confinement of the phenomena. That doesn't mean there's mind somewhere, right? And even if there were, as he says, he can't refute it. No, but then why are you talking about it? Because you can't refute something you just came up with. I don't like these kinds of weird, crazy arguments of some philosophers, right? I made up something and I can't refute it, so I have to take it. I mean, it's like, shut up, right? Even if there were something called mind in which the phenomena lives, right, are suspended in mind, then if that which the phenomena are describing if they are representation of an external world, right, then even mind wouldn't know what it is because it has never been or understood that external world because it's not a part of it, right? And I think that's why people like these, they like the idea of mind everywhere, because then it's sort of all connected. Your mind is connected with some bigger mind, and that allows you to sort of linguistically go and talk about what the hell it is, right? So be careful with monists, right? They want to blur the lines of what they can talk about so they can get away with shit they otherwise wouldn't be able to get away with in, let's say, some kind of dualist or pluralist scenario, right?
Then the fourth one is that there's no evidence for non-physical substance. Therefore, there's by definition no real feeling but an illusion. But then we talked about that again, and they'll say it's an illusion. I can't.
Let's tackle the last two. There is no.
But it's again these illusionists. They suffer from the physicalist paradox, and they can't get out of this trap, sort of, right? And they try to explain things away rather than finding out whether or not there are actually some foundational problems in their thinking, right? So they're trying to explain that way, or downplay its importance or something like that, in order to keep what they believe in. And I guess that's what, these people on this channel here and Bernardo Kastrup, they're trying to say. And I possibly agree with them, though it might be sort of a somewhat strawmanish presentation of whatever it is illusionists they actually try to argue, because I'm confused about it. Let me just say that, right?
Evidence for consciousness. As Galen Strawson says, in saying this, the illusionists can only be meaning with the word consciousness something other than the rest of us understands by the word. Because to say that consciousness is an illusion is immediately self-defeating, because an illusion is a content of consciousness. So the moment you say consciousness is an illusion, you are saying that it exists. Because illusion...
But isn't it, yeah, do you need to be conscious in order to have the illusion? So if you have consciousness in order to have an illusion, the consciousness can't be an illusion, because it's that which presents the illusion, and we're going into these kinds of epicycles of weirdness, right? And they get lost in this, right? It's possibly, if you could somehow map out how much money and time is spent on trying to figure this shit out, you will probably, you know, I mean, pull your hair out, right? All these people with degrees in this and that, and spending time and money, and everybody's, you know, it's like, it's incredible, right? And I get the notion that people who can't get to a solution are pushed as front and center of academia, so they make sure that no solutions are found, right? So they can keep saying, yeah, we need some more money over here. We are thinking, we are close. Maybe in 20, 30 years we will come up with whatever, right? It's a charade. It's ridiculous. It seems like the more academic philosophers you add to the pile, the less good philosophy you get, right? Back in the day when you know, it was only the occasional village idiot who was a philosopher, right? And they actually they went somewhere, right? Spinoza, Immanuel Kant, or Hume, or, you know, they actually wrestled with it, right? What are these academics doing, right? I mean, they can't even get the basics right. So why would I care about them, right? And I guess I'm sort of a proponent of the idea of no. Academia and philosopher is a bad mix, right? Whenever economic interests of whatever kind mixes up with philosophy, it creates bad philosophy, right? It's not... Philosophy is foundational. It's something it's like eating and sleeping and you know, things you just... It's a part of what it means to be a human being, right? The unexamined life is not worth living, to paraphrase, you know, Plato and Socrates, right? I guess none of them have actually said that, but it's sort of a rephrasing of some quote, right? But the idea is that all the possibly all the problems there is or have been in human history is exactly because of either bad philosophy or no philosophy. And some power structure telling people, you shouldn't think for yourself, let your masters think for you. We in the new millennium of welfare state, we have the aristocracy, which is academia. You just have to give them money and they'll think the big think. And you just have to go and work your night shifts and pay some fucking taxes, right? And then everything will be solved, right? And 100 years later, nothing has been solved. Everybody is just more confused, right? It's about time that philosophy as an expressionist, as an extrovert endeavor has to be taken away from academia, right? They're fucking it up, right? And it seems to me that it's only the most incoherent and babbling people who are front and center in various areas of philosophy, right? And I guess that's why I'm very critical also about Bernardo Kastrup, because he's sort of a gray area kind of person, right? He's working from this sort of, on paper, probably not, but on paper, sort of private organization of Essentia Foundation, right? It's not directly government, but there's probably some tax exemptions involved. So it's sort of a fascistic structure, possibly, right? I'm hazarding a guess, right? And it's sort of it's a sign of the how what's it called when something has grown into it's fossilized academia, right? That's another term that is better. It's not actually fossilized, but it's calcified. Academia, it's completely fucked up, man, right? And in my opinion, if everybody in sort of government or anything approaching that, they all went in a rocket and went to the far end of the universe, or just on the dark side of the moon, you wouldn't hear a squeak from me, right? I'll just say, well, let's the rest of us just work on a free market, right? Let's work this out on a free market. Nobody's forced to do anything, right? If you don't want to pay taxes, you shouldn't be forced to, right? At this point in time, we are still living in the Middle Ages. People have a gun to their face in order to pay for some shit they don't want, right? It's fucking crazy. And nobody seems to be able to see the big elephant in the room, right? And of course, that power structure wants some, crazy academics who think they're going to solve the biggest problem, while they can't solve it because they suffer from all sorts of fallacies, right? And they're protecting the power structure against those who could actually think and figure out that maybe that power structure isn't actually virtuous or moral, right? I'm not saying it necessarily, because it depends on the moral principle, but they might find that out. They don't want that. They want a fence of academics protecting the power structure. And if the academics, basically most of them, are on the payroll, of course they're not going to bite the hand that feed them, right? So they keep people down who actually could possibly argue rigidly in a coherent set of philosophies, right? Just a small side rant here, right?
Illusions are consciousness. They cannot be anything else. You see, if you look up to the night sky and you see a ship, a colonial era clipper flying in the sky, and you tell that your neighbor will say, well, that was an illusion. What do we mean by that? What we mean by that is that you had the conscious experience of a clipper flying in the sky, but that did not correspond to anything outside your conscious experience of it. In other words, not only are you saying that there is consciousness, you're saying that consciousness is all there is. Because there was nothing outside consciousness to ground the reality of your conscious experience of a clipper flying in the sky. You see? So, but they're not stupid, right? They are not handicapped people. They are deluded, but they are not physiologically impaired people. So what do they mean by consciousness? Because it cannot be phenomenal consciousness as a category of existence, because illusions are already an instance of that which they are denying. So they cannot mean that. What do they mean by consciousness? You can get clues from the work of another eliminativist, Stanford, a neuroscientist. I forgot his name.
Is it
I forgot it. Huh?
Is it Italian name?
Yeah. It has a Latin name. Michael Graziano. Yeah. Michael Graziano. I had an exchange with him in writing on the magazine of the Institute of Art and Ideas. And in his reply to me, it became, well, even in his written work, you can see that The consciousness that he says, quote, doesn't happen, doesn't exist, what he means by that is a kind of ghost, a kind of spatially bound soul type thing that has its own sense of identity and boundaries. In other words, he's not talking about a class of existence. He's not talking about an ontic kind. He's
I'm sort
talking
of
about
fed up with this illusionism. I don't care about his potential straw manning of what they're talking about in illusionism. So I'll get down to 1:14:30 about Galen Strawson and idealism. So let me see if I can kick this off. I'm pushing my MacBook here a bit.
I just want to finish on the illusionism thing
Okay.
before we move on to Ontic. But like Strawson has said too multiple times, which I think he's actually an idealist now. He said it at a Google chat a couple years ago. He's like, all real physicalists are idealists. It's really interesting. And when he throws the argument back at the illusionists, he says, show me your evidence for non-experiential stuff.
That points to a problem I seem to be the only one apparently who have noticed. That how do you talking about stepping from the frying pan into the fire, right? Why would you go from materialism directly to idealism? If you somehow find a problem with materialism or physicalism, then that problem should be, in my opinion, not just there's something I can't figure out, maybe I should become an idealist. That's sort of I guess somebody else might have, it's not based on thinking, it's based on, I guess I can't explain I'll just jump on the other boat and talk to these people over here and hope that something, it's like, no, if there's something that is wrong with your philosophy, you have to take a step back and see if there's a problem there, right? And if you can't find a problem there, you maybe should even take a step further back and further back and further back, right? Because it has to be your philosophy that is the problem. Your philosophy cannot overrule how you work. It's how you work that tells you the foundations of your philosophy. That's why I'm so focused on this ontology, because ontology is describing and qualifying and categorizing and showing interdependencies of your phenomena, which is the whole of your toolbox, right? So if there's a problem somewhere, the problem is within your philosophy. It's not the ism that is a problem, right? The ism, the problems in the ism is some prior philosophy in a earlier step in how you arrived at that particular ism. So you have to step back in your own philosophy, and if you don't have that foundational philosophy, then maybe you should start there rather than say, no, I'm jump ship and find another ism ship over there, right? So you're jumping from ism to ism rather than doing some groundwork philosophy, right? And if you find a problem in physicalism, it should be identifying the paradox built into physicalism is when I say I'm experiencing this hand outside my experiences, right? If I say my experiences in here and I say I'm experiencing this hand out here, there is a paradox in that description. So you need to deal with that, right? So maybe a couple of steps back in your philosophy, if you have one, and if you don't, then do that ground floor philosophy. And if you have, go back and check if there's something that you didn't account for, or you got wrong, right? And in my opinion, the next step, if you're a physicalist, you don't just jump into idealism. You should step back to, let's say, a solipsism and say, okay, I'm working from my toolbox, right? A solipsist is basically saying there's nothing but my toolbox. But if you step away from physicalism, there's no problem in mentally stepping into solipsism and say, okay, how do I work my way out of, quote, solipsism, if that's my endeavor, right? But it seems like, and that's the problem with these guys and Bernardo Kastrup and a whole lot of other people, including a lot of idealists, I suppose, right? They keep the idea of the external world even when they refute it. They refute or they reject physicalism. They keep that external world as if it's given to them, right? That can't be foundational. It's absolutely impossible. You can't start out with a dichotomy, right? There have to be some more foundational philosophy before that, arriving at that dichotomy of an inside and an outside, right? So what is that foundational shit? Because it has to be connected. That dichotomy has to spring out from how you approach what you did just before that. And if there weren't a dichotomy, then there's just one thing, so to say. There's no inside, outside. There's just the toolbox, right? So what is it about the toolbox then that makes you say, aha, now I have to bring in a dichotomy? What is the fucking argument? Right? Nobody has presented any rigid argument in this direction. They come up with all sorts of fluffy shit that I'm not buying into, right? And as I'm presenting in my ontology here, any external world that people can refer to is always an abstraction or imagination. Whatever term you want to put on it, it is something they have access to. So that external world they're referencing can only be a part of the toolbox, right? So it's not an external world they're referring to. They're referring to an idea of an external world, right? Just in a similar fashion, if I talk to you and I say banana, and you imagine banana based on the term I used, that doesn't mean that popped up a banana in your hand or something like that, right? In the same fashion, the imagination of an external world doesn't create an external world. It's absolutely important. It's so foundational, I can't describe it in words, right? If you believe that you all of a sudden created an external world out of nowhere, right? There's a problem in your philosophy. And if you just take it for granted, it's even worse, right? Always, when you are deconstructing or checking out somebody else's philosophy, start out with the basics. Do they have all grounds covered here, right? And if not, it doesn't matter what they come up with later, down the road, about whatever phenomena and external world and ripples and shit. Doesn't matter, because it's all a figment of their bad thinking, right? They have to describe how they get from one thing to the other, right? Otherwise, it's just wishful philosophy. So
he might be coming on to the idealist side, which is kind of cool. And he defines it as pure panpsychism because of the... But anyway, yeah, he says it's a reductio ad absurdum, pulling the territory from the map, etc. So it's kind of interesting how you see the... Anyway, yeah.
I haven't met Galen or...
I actually, a while back, thought about the idea of reductio ad absurdum, right? Which is sort of when somebody claims something, and then you can sort of reduce it down to its fundamental structure and point out there's something that doesn't work, and it becomes ridiculous. It becomes absurd, right? And that's how you figure out whether or not that actual first statement is kind of valid, right? Or something along those lines, right? But reductio is an appeal to reduction, right? So if people are accepting the idea of reductio ad absurdum, for instance, they are also accepting the idea of reduction. But you can't reduce something without interdependencies, right? Because every object, every phenomena is standing alone. It's not dependent on anything else, right? So you can't reduce then. But if you say you can reduce, there must be dependencies, right? So if you're dealing with phenomena, which I would suppose it would be, otherwise what the hell would it be you are reducing, right? Then there has to be interdependencies. And if you're reducing something, there must be something that is more foundational than something else. That which you're stating is not foundational, but it's based on some foundational shit further down the line of back in earlier states of the philosophy. So you can get a lot of inputs about how thinking actually works. It works very much from dependencies and definitions and deductions and logic and reasoning and rationalizations and whatever, right? Which is sort of something follows from something else. So wouldn't it be fair to say that your ontology possibly should deal with how the various phenomena are interdependent, right? That's what I've done in my ontology here, right? I'm saying the starting point is qualia. The next step possibly is cognitions. And the last step is some kind of abstraction from that prior step, which is cognition. And in a few rare cases, I'm working with the idea of art being a direct abstraction from qualia, right? Not always necessarily, because when I look at a movie, I'm cognizing persons and cars and trees and houses and whatever, right? But I'm just reveling, I'm just enjoying the view, so to say, right? When I'm eating nice food that is presented in an artistic way, it's about the colors and the smells and the tastes, and it's sort of enjoying pure bliss of qualia, right? But if I have to go to work, it's about cognizing various shit, right? My cars, my clothes, my breakfast, my keys, my car, my driving on the road, and it's a lot of cognitions, right? So basically, the step is you can't have cognitions without qualia, right? And you can't have abstractions without cognitions. You might have abstractions, as I say, directly from qualia, like music, right? I'm not cognizing elephants or anything like that when I'm hearing music. I'm just enjoying the sound of it, right? So to say. So you can have some abstractions, I suppose, directly from qualia. But in everyday workings, it's like the qualia, and from that there are cognitions, and from cognitions there are abstractions. This is sort of the three-step dependency, right? You can't have qualia that is based on cognitions. Cognitions can only be based on qualia, right? I guess it's about having a simple structure about how you work. You can't make up philosophy in order to explain something that you came up with, right? Your philosophy has to be a reflection of that toolbox you have to work with. Otherwise, you're just creating sort of weird cloud castles of imagination, right?
6.5 years now. Last time I met him, I have to be careful now because it's about some other. He was going through a very difficult patch of his personal life. I'm not going to.
I'm going to step
on
up. It's sort of anecdotal. It sounds like. So I'm jumping to the next one, right? The next one is at 1:19:29 on Ontic structural realism. Ontic structural realism. Whatever the hell that is, right?
I'm just going to finish this section before we move into other stuff. Are you still feeling good, Bernardo? Yeah?
Yeah, sure.
Okay.
You guys are pretty good at this.
Okay.
I enjoy
So
talking to you.
Oh.
Thank you.
Okay.
Good at what? Good at what? Asking you questions so you can sit there, be the priest. Yes. You are not, scrutinizing any of my shit. You're just sitting there saying, yeah, my liege, my king, speak to me. Your wish is my command, right? Fuck off, man.
So this one is the last thing I think physicalists can go on, and you talked about this with Carlo Rovelli. It's about relationalism and things like that. So just quickly, there's a thing called Ontic structural realism and then epistemic structural realism. So for a lot of panpsychists and even some idealists, we would use epistemic structural realism to say, the intrinsic nature of something is mentality. So like Timothy Sprigg, John Leslie, a bunch of other, like Bertrand Russell has said, science tells us the behavior of matter.
Doesn't it look like these, solarium? What are they called? Goggles. You when you take sun, or what is it? Artificial sun. Doesn't he have these, orange man white goggle areas around his? It looks so stupid. Maybe it's just sunburned. I don't know, but
not what it is in itself. And Timothy Sprigg has famously argued this in his Absolute Idealism, that it can't just be structure with structure. Something has to ground it, and the thing that we know about it is consciousness.
No. The thing we know, what is that? I don't know what consciousness is. That's an abstraction. It's like saying, yeah, but there's all this fauna out there, but you have to sort of what's the basics? Well, it's a mammal. No, there's no animal that is mammal, right? Mammal is an artificial category of some kind, right? We don't know consciousness, but what is it? I have color, sounds, taste, touch, and feel, right? Taste and color, sounds, smells, taste, and touch, right? Is that consciousness? I don't know. I mean, I could call it that, but why would I? I already use some terms. Color, smell, sound, taste, and touch. That's enough. I don't need other words to describe it, right? And then I have cognitions, right? Like elephant and bicycle and so on. Each of these cognitions have a word. Why would I need other words to describe them? There might be something, a category like mammal, that is sort of useful in communication with other individuals, right? I understand that. But that doesn't mean that it all of a sudden has a cognition or, an existence just because I came up with the term mammal, right? At what point do you get to the term consciousness? If anything, it's an abstraction, right? So we don't have access to consciousness in that sense as an experience that is foundational, because you are appealing to something that is ground floor foundational. It can't be, right? Because there's something that category of consciousness holds, supposedly, like phenomena, right? Like elephants and bicycles and pizzas, that you have before you came up with the idea of consciousness. It's just, I find it incredible that these people live in these abstractions rather than getting down to the basics. They think that it's foundational, but it's also because they have this monistic approach. It has to be one thing, right? So they'll never get to any good philosophy because it's agenda-driven, right? So they immediately step away from what is actually foundational, and then they create some artificial abstract foundation they try to explain everything else with. That's the problem of these idealists, right?
Oh, Keith Frankish and a couple other people has said, well, there's Ontic structuralism. So many structuralists will say the only thing that only structure exists, just mass, charge, spin. There's no need for anything to ground it. So, and I think Carlo really talked about that, but then you just have turtles all the way down, just structure. I don't know. And then someone has just a quick little thing, depending on how you answer, and then that's it for the structural realism stuff. I don't know if that's a threat to idealism, but yeah.
No. Should I comment?
It's difficult to comment. Sorry, that one was. It's just Do you buy the intrinsic nature argument, or do you just say like it's all just consciousness? So it could be ontic structural, but it's just consciousness, or yeah.
There is
No, but we have to stop here now, right? Hang on, dude. Because if you're saying everything is consciousness, or everything is mind, or everything is subjectivity, or everything is an abstraction, or pure abstraction, all these terms that are floating around, everything is one thing, then your philosophy stops there. You are not allowed to say anything else. Because as soon as you start to say anything, qualify various aspects of that supposed everything, you are destroying the foundation of everything is one thing. You can't have your cake and eat it too. You can't say everything is one thing and then start to qualify all sorts of various aspects supposedly within that one thing. Then it makes no sense to have it as one thing. You just want to have monism and then go ahead and sort of forget about that monism and start to qualify and describe all sorts of shit in an unmentioned number of categories of various shit, right? So you're basically a pluralist attempting to pretend to be a monist, right? I'm not buying any of that shit, right? Because to me, a sound is categorically different from a taste. There are no similarities. I have no reason to think that everything is one thing, right? And I have 5 senses: colors, sound, smell, touch, and taste, right? They are different in nature, so to say, right? To the best of my understanding, the only decent conclusion would be is there might be at least 5 different categories, right? The whole picture is made up of these 5 qualia, right? From which everything else spring, in my opinion. In alignment with my ontology here, right? So it's like, I don't think that most philosophers actually want to go down and settle and say, I'm going to adhere to my own rules of what I can do, right? Because it puts limitations on what they can say. So they want it to be sort of fluffy, but also very rigid, using a term like everything is mind or something like that, right? And then when they said that, then there's some ripples, and then there's some, science, and then there's this, and then there's that, and then there's the other. They're just bringing all the old shit back in, after they said everything is mind. Now, I'm not buying that. If you say everything is mind, done. There's no further philosophy. Nothing. Everything is one thing. There's not many things. There's not many minds. There's just one thing that is mind. You can't go and slice it up afterwards, because then you're creating different categories out of that one thing. You're not allowed to do that, in my opinion. And that's why I don't like this monist approach, because you're starting out with an abstraction and then you're trying to explain everything from an abstraction, but that's invalid to the best of my understanding and according to my ontology, right? That you have to start with a qualia. You don't start with an abstraction. You start with a qualia, right? And it's, I bet you, without being completely certain about this, right? All the problems, like the mind and matter problem, the heart problem of consciousness, the zombie problem, the problem of other minds, and so on and so on and so on, is based or arrives because people start from a abstract foundation rather than with the qualia as the foundation. If they did that, they wouldn't have all these problems. But because they start with an abstraction and then try to explain qualia, it's the wrong direction. They're violating the structure of their foundational. If I were to as you know, I can only talk about my own experience, right? But if their experience is anything like mine, then I would say they have the same ontology as I have, right? I have to work from that idea. If you can find flaws in my ontology, let me have it. I would love to hear about any flaws, right? But I think it's so simple and irrefutable. I guess you could add some more detail to category C, the abstractions, right? Possibly, absolutely. But A and B are cut in stone, in my opinion, right? I have always experienced things like that. I always had that understanding of my ontology without even knowing that that's the ontology, right? And it's not because I always had it, but it's how I work. Even when I didn't understand that this was an actually foundational ontology, I'm not trying to come up with shit. I'm basically just describing how I work. So, because all these, high-flying philosophers are so good at juggling abstractions, they think that abstractions are the starting point, right? And they'll never get to anything good because they're starting on the third step of the ladder, right?
Structure to the contents of perception. That's a given fact.
Sorry. So the grounding would be the consciousness, so then we would be epistemic, but Ontic would deny that.
One thing maybe to point to that I've argued in my presentation on this ontology, right? If you didn't have a color, sound, smell, taste, or touch, and never have had it, would you have been able to cognize elephant, for instance? I would say not, right? I mean, how would you? Because you don't have any of that content that is necessary in order to cognize, right? Would you be able to abstract any story about external worlds, epistemology, ethics, or physics, anything like that, without cognitions? If there were just colors and sounds and taste, could you make ethics out of that? Could you make physics? It would be ridiculous, right? When you're doing physics, it's all about cognitions. As I talked about when you go up the Eiffel Tower, bring your car keys, right? Drop your car keys. It always does the same thing. It moves from that ladder of the Eiffel Tower down to the ground or to earth, right? Do it again, it drops. Do it again, drops, right? But these are not colors and sounds you're referring to. These are cognitions that move, with relation to each other in a particular fashion. So you couldn't have physics without cognitions, right? Epistemology, what would that be? I know color, I know red. No, you know khaki, or Eiffel Tower or Earth, right? Because you're not always knowing it. You're not always knowing Eiffel Tower, but when you know it, right? When you cognize it, you cognize it. So there's a very natural structure to this, in my opinion. So it's a very much about not getting lost in abstractions, right? That's probably the biggest problem in getting to anything functional in philosophical discourse, right?
I hesitate answering in technical terms because that's the game of the opposition. The opposition wants to avoid the clarity of the
those we are
conclusion
fighting against. Yes,
through obscurantism,
we are
by using technique.
If I could stop it. We are defending our idealism against these physicalists, right? The infidels.
Words in tortuous ways. So we think, there may be something to that, but I can't quite discern because of all this jargon. So there is a structure to the contents of perception. We know that, right? I can discern your face on my computer screen from the other windows on my computer screen. The fact that I can make this discernment means that there is structure to the contents of my perception. Now, we also know that perception is extraordinarily useful to allow us to survive in the world. So there has to be a correspondence between perception and the world. And therefore, if there is structure in perception,
How did that arrive? The world, it is like, it's just there. What world? It's again this, you have to argue for it. You can't take anything for granted. I'm not buying it, right? I'm not experiencing world. I'm experiencing qualia and cognitions, and I'm having some abstractions from it, right? I'm not experiencing world. How do you get to it? Is it some kind of abstraction from your qualia and cognitions? Well, then it's an abstraction. It's not a world then, right? In the best understanding. Because that world the first world you have access to is that qualia and cognition spectacle. But that's not the world you're referring to. You're referring to that spectacle, or the qualia and cognitions, as a representation of that world. How did you get to that world? It's this incredible leap that is sort of undisclosed. How the fuck do you get to this world? Just because you used to? You used to, when you were a physicalist, you used to do that, and you just kept that world without scrutinizing it, even after, rejecting physicalism. It's a fucking incredible, man, right?
There has to be some structure in the world.
No, just to back up a bit, I'm not saying you can't work from the idea of an external world. You just have to be careful how you argue for it, right? And if you can't argue for it, you have to state it as an axiom, which is another way of saying, and I've repeated this many times, right? It's another way of saying, I can't argue for it, but I have to get to it. I have to use it, right? That's an axiom. He pretends that he doesn't even have to argue for it. It's just there, out of nowhere, right? You can't bring in something you can't experience and say it's there because I just decided to. I mean, how the hell did you get to it? It's an imagination, but just because you imagine shit doesn't make it so, right?
Otherwise, the structure of perception would be ungrounded. And all evidence shows that it is not ungrounded, it's not arbitrary. Although the contents of perception are different from the world, and the structure of perception may...
It's different from what world? So if the world is different from your perceptions, then what tool are you using to get to that world? Because if it's different, I mean, if it's the same, why would there be another world? If it's the same as your experience, right? That sounds weird, right? And if it's different, how do you get to it? Because then you can't use your experience to get to that external world because it's different, as you say. So what is the fucking argument, man, right? If he says something like, well, when you say something and I hear that sound, it tells me there's something. No, it doesn't. That's an interpretation of your phenomena, right? That might just be Descartes' demon sitting there telling you, yeah, I'm outside you, right?
May be different from the structure of the world, it must mirror the salient aspects of the world. So if perception, the mirroring, has structure, the world has to have some structure, even if it's different from the contents of perception.
No, this is a bit of a leap, right? So he has undisclosed external world. And because he has identified some structure to that experience of his, right? He says, therefore, there must be structure out there, even if it's a different kind of structure. That's a bit of a fucking leap, right? That's one imagination on top of another imagination. I'm not buying that. I'm not allowing more than one imagination, and then it has to point back to the last step, which is cognitions, right? And in a few rare cases, maybe qualia, right? Like music. You can't say, okay, I came up with an external world, and because I have qualia cognitions, I can say something about the contents of that external world. That's ridiculous, man, right? That's the turtle on top of turtles, as far as you want, right? I'm not buying that.
So there has to be structure in the world. It cannot be a uniform goo. It can't be that. That there has to be some kind of structure. Otherwise, perception itself, in mirroring the world or in encoding the world in some sense, wouldn't have structure. So there has to be.
I'm not buying that. Yeah, it's a reasonable axiom to work for. I would agree with that. But you are pretending this to be arguments. These are not arguments, these are imaginations, right? You are talking about something that is not a part of your experience, but you're arguing about it as if it's an experience. That's a foundational violation. As soon as you say external world, done, you are done arguing, because all you can argue about and philosophize about is your ontology, what is within your phenomena. You can't create some external world you don't have access to and then start to fabulate about its content. First of all, you need to tell me how you get to that external world without axioms, pretending to argue, and then how you then allow yourself from an imagination start to then imagine its contents or its structure or whatever, right? I'm not buying it, man, right?
Ontic structure. And since perception is experienced,
it's ontic structure. So now it's an ontic, that's an ontology about an external world, right? The problem of this is that because I don't have access to an external world, anybody's coming up with any shit about an external world, I can't refute because I don't have access to it. So the only thing I can say to these people is, you're bullshitting me. Because I'm not accepting that external world that I can't go and check whether or not you're right. I'm not buying that because you have looked at your dashboard and say, oh, there's something here that is interesting. Maybe this points in the direction of what is going on out there, right? No. First of all, you need to argue very well for an external world. And when you've done that, there's no further argumentation in that direction. That external world has then to point back to your cognitions. Otherwise, it's just mind castles, right? I'm not buying it.
there obviously is epistemic structure as well. And there must be some correspondence between the two, even if one doesn't necessarily mirror the other. Even if one structure is not identical to the other, there has to be some transfer function that allows you to go from one to the other in a manner that allows you to survive.
That's bullshit, right? He's just fabulating, right? He's fabulating. He feels he's very comfortable talking about something he doesn't have access to, right? And I would bet you that the reason he's comfortable is exactly because you can't go and check. He doesn't want to spend time discussing, qualia and concepts and cognitions and abstractions and so on, which is what you have actually access to. No, he wants to jump into that imagined external world and start to tell you about how it works, because you can't go and check it, right?
Otherwise, perception would be useless. You wouldn't see the train coming to kill you, or you wouldn't see the plate of food in front of you, and you wouldn't survive. So there has to be structure on both ends, and there has to be a transfer function between the two structures. So I think all of these are givens. They do not depend on philosophical positions and arguments.
Really? They don't depend. I hadn't noticed that before in my first listen through. I need to hear that again.
Or you wouldn't see the plate of food in front of you, and you wouldn't survive. So there has to be structure.
That's the appeal to the iconic nature of your experience. You have those icons on your dashboard, so to say, that removes everything that is unnecessary fluff, so you can get to the fruit, and you can get to the, that's why fruit is usually another color than leaves, right? The fruit is red or, yellow, so you can see it in the green, photosynthesis leaves, right? Or what are they called? Green particles in leaves, right? So the it's not because that the fruit has this color, but the way your system, that's the theory, right? Your system works, has evolved, so to say, to work this way, so you're able to find what you need, not because you need to understand how trees and fruits actually work. It looks the way and feels the way it does because that's how it works to the ends of Darwinistic survival, right? I understand the argument, but I don't think that an argument for you can have a theory about it, but you can have a philosophical argument about the nature of your dashboard, so to say, based on a scientific theory. That doesn't work. So I'm not bringing any evolution into my understanding of because I need to scrutinize my dashboard in order to get to evolution, and that's sort of a circular argument, right? At least I'm very skeptical of it, right? But let's get back into this statement here.
Structure on both ends, and there has to be a transfer function between the two structures. So I think all of these...
A transfer function, right? Okay, so that external world is telling your dissociation, to the best of my understanding of what he says, what is out there. Because your dissociation is not a part of that external world, so it cannot know what is out there. So somehow the connection point between your dissociation and the rest of mind, that outside mind is telling you this is what is out there. And you need to present this. Right? It's just no. There's so much embedded in what he's saying. Some underlying necessary axioms that are not disclosed. He's taking shit for granted, and that's what he basically says in the next few seconds here.
These are givens. They do not depend on philosophical positions and arguments. These are pretty reliable.
Pretty reliable? Yeah, it's pretty reliable. You don't need to philosophize or argue or science, anything like that. Of course it's given there's something outside my experiences that I can't experience. And of course I can tell you, because my experiences are like this, it must mean that outside world I just imagined is like this, or functions like this. And that you don't have to argue for that. No. It's just given to you, right? Holy shit, man. This is one of the core reasons why I am so fucking, obsessed with this dude, right? Because it's this kind of easygoing with foundational philosophy that my hair start to, if I had some hair, right? My beard is starting to electrify. It's unbelievable how loose his mentality is around these parts. You don't even have to argue for it, right? Of course there's an external world, and I'm going to tell you how it's the structure of it. Of course, it's obvious, man, right? Why are you asking these stupid questions? Fuck off, man, right? I'll have to really scrutinize this. So I'll get back to this point in the next part at 1:24:31, and I'll get back and take it from there, because this seems to be a really important, this Ontic structural realism, right? So this is where the shit gets down, right? Okay, have a nice day. See you in the next one.